This is the time of year where many churches are typically having sermons on the topic of stewardship and having their stewardship campaigns. We're all used to it. It doesn't particularly thrill any of us. We've been through this before afterwards. I mean, we've all heard those little sayings like, the church has plenty of money. Unfortunately, it's in your pockets. Anyone heard that one before? I've even been part of some stewardship campaigns before I became ordained clergy, where the annual church budget would be compiled and then divided by however many people were members or however many people attended, and had people stand up and say, okay, folks, your portion of this ministry is going to cost you. Yeah. The expressions on your faces is pretty much what the expression on all of our faces were as well. I hate those kind of things, don't you? It's okay, we can be honest here. Does anybody enjoy a good stewardship campaign? Except maybe the finance people. No. Because we all have this idea that, well, it's time for me to go and hear a bunch of sermons about money. But stewardship is so much more than this. My approach to preaching and teaching about the spiritual discipline of stewardship is different. Because it's not my style to hit you over the head with these kind of things. Now, I might hit you over the head about some things, but it's not my style to go and say, we need money. Especially when it's in things, or it's in regard to things that you already know. For instance, you know that supporting your church is important because we're told in Scripture that we are to financially support the kingdom of God. We know that this church incurs operating expenses. Our staff deserve to be compensated for the work that they do, not only for this church, but for the kingdom as well. We appreciate having the lights on when we come. We appreciate having the temperature regulated somewhat. I realize everybody is not on the same wavelength as this. You come in and it's too cold or it's too hot, and there's never any baby bears that it's just right. But we know that these things have to happen. We know that things like the paper that your bulletin is printed on has to be provided. The plates, the napkins, the silverware that we use for our potlucks and our meals, even the toilet paper in the bathroom. All of those things have to be accounted for in our budget. Now, all of these things are important, but you know these things. We don't need to spend 4 weeks talking about toilet paper and paper plates. My job as your pastor and as your teacher is to help you grow in your relationship with Jesus Christ and help you understand how every part of our life, even the financial part of our life, is directly related to your spiritual journey. So as we begin this new sermon series called It's a Wonderful Life, it's my hope and intent that we learn to have a healthy perspective on money and its place in our lives. Money is one of those things that if we are worrying about it, if we worry that we don't have enough, if we worry we don't know where it's going to come from, it upsets every part of our life. And I don't need confirmation from you on this because I have experienced this for myself. So I want for us to learn to have a healthy perspective on money and its place in our lives. I want for all of us to learn things that we can take and put into our daily practice. Because let's face it, money plays a pretty big role in our lives. How much we have, how much we don't have, how we view others based on how much money we think they have, what we have to do to earn money to be able to support ourselves. I could go on. Now, the reason for doing this is important. We need to examine the relationship that we have with money because it goes along with our spiritual lives. And this happens for several reasons. First, as I mentioned, we are called to practice the spiritual discipline of stewardship. Second, money touches all of us. It affects us physically, emotionally, and spiritually if we are worried about our financial health. And finally, if we are to live a spiritually abundant life, we have to look at how money influences and shapes the decisions that we make in our lives. There are two resources that I've been reading as I've prepared this sermon series. The first is Integrating Meaning and Money, practices for a heart-centered life, and reading some different ideas about stewardship. And the second is the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And the movie begins with this dialogue that happens up in the heavens.
You sent for me, sir?
Yes, Clarence. A man down on Earth needs our help.
Splendid. Is he sick?
No, worse. He's discouraged.
Well, if you remember this part, this is where God is talking to an angel and is saying that there's a man down on Earth that needs some help. And so they send for Clarence. Remember Clarence? And so God tells Clarence, it's your turn to go down and help somebody. And Clarence asks what's wrong. And he says, and I can't remember exactly what he thinks is wrong with this man's life. And God says, no, worse, he's discouraged. And with that dialogue between God and Clarence, we learn about a man named George Bailey, who after looking at the circumstances of his life, decides that perhaps it would be better if he had never been born at all. But when we look deeper into this plot line of It's a Wonderful Life, we find that money plays a huge role. So over these next 4 weeks, we'll look at some of the characters in It's a Wonderful Life to see what their money style is and how that style, how that way that they deal with money affects just about every decision that they make in the movie. So today we're going to start by looking at the financial system that we live in and how we can live within it, having a stronger sense of health and well-being. Every aspect of our lives is touched by the financial system in which we live. Whether we own a home or rent, whether we have a job or we don't, whether we add a lot of spending into our gross national revenue or we don't, every part of our lives is affected by our financial system. Now, this is nothing new. Every civilization has had to have some type of method by which goods and services were traded. How infrastructure is built and maintained, and how financial solvency is upheld. This was the case even in Jesus' time. Fred read the story from the Gospel of Matthew, and we hear in it a plot between the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the Jewish people, and the Herodians, who were political supporters of King Herod, and therefore they were supporting the Roman Empire. These two groups did not like each other. They didn't agree on anything save for one thing: Jesus. They both knew and felt that something had to be done about this Jesus character before he caused an uprising among the Jewish people that wouldn't be able to be controlled by the Pharisees or the Herodians. It's kind of one of those the enemy of my enemy is my friend situations. So they come up with this trick question, and they use the subject of money, taxes, to be specific. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now, people were not happy to pay taxes back then, just like we grumble about our taxes right now. But it was a little bit different in Jesus' time. We just mail off our check to the IRS, or we have our taxes taken out of our paychecks so we never even see them. That wasn't the case during Jesus' time. The tax collector would knock on your door, knock, knock, knock. Hello, I'm here to collect your taxes. They are, and he gave an amount. And that amount was usually higher than the actual amount of tax owed, because then the tax collectors would skim off the top and pocket the difference. So people really didn't like taxes back then. And besides having to pay taxes to the Empire of Rome, every adult male Jewish man was expected to pay a half a shekel in temple tax to support the operations of the temple. So they were taxed by the government, they were taxed by their church. People did not like either of these things. And so this was a very carefully laid trap for Jesus, designed to immediately rile the people up who happened to be standing around as Jesus was asked this question. It was a carefully laid trap, and it was a very dangerous question for Jesus to answer. If he said, yes, pay your taxes to Rome, it would be perceived that he was conspiring with the Roman Empire and justified the oppression of Israel by the Roman Empire. If he said, nah, don't worry about paying your Roman taxes, that could have gotten him killed because he was committing a crime against the state of Rome. So Jesus gives this answer that puts money into perspective. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. So it puts it into perspective, but it's a very complex perspective, and one that continues up until this day. Most of us have a complex and emotional relationship with money. Sometimes that can be accompanied by some deep wounds, by some very deep wounds. Our backgrounds, how we were brought up, how we watched our parents handle their money situations, our personal experiences that we've had with money have an impact on our relationship with money today. I'll share with you just something from mine and Todd's own. Living in Utah, didn't live extravagantly, lived well. We were able to take vacations, we were able to do things. I decided finally that I would answer this invitation to ordain ministry, an invitation that had been offered 14 years earlier, but I had politely declined in favor of getting married and having kids and having a family. And so after God made it abundantly clear that he was very serious when he told me to do that 13 years ago, I entered seminary. Seminary is expensive. We saw our savings go down, but we knew that was going to happen. I was in graduate school. Things were okay until The economy collapsed in 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere around in there. And all of a sudden, Todd's executive status at the newspaper corporation he was working for changed. You're going to have to take mandatory furloughs. When you take mandatory furloughs, there's another journalist here shaking their head. When you take mandatory furloughs, you get a week's vacation. That's great. The bad part is you're not paid for it. All of the stock options that were our retirement, that were our kids' college funds, all of those things became worthless. And all of a sudden, this life that we'd led that was a pretty good life became cinching up the belts. Being able to tell our kids, I'm sorry, we can't do that right now. That experience of going through that has had a tremendous impact on how Todd and I now handle our finances. Those are the kind of things that form our money relationship. Did you watch your parents struggle financially? What experiences have you had that have shaped how you view and use money? And what is it about this idea of money that can make us so fearful, that can make us so uncomfortable? Well, for many people, what we have and what we believe about what we have influences decisions about how we live our lives and who we think we are. Do we have to have the big house? Do we have to have the fancy car to help show the world who we are? That's why our financial lives are so closely related to our spiritual lives, because God tells us that these things don't matter. I mean, they matter. We have to have a home. We have to have transportation. But they don't matter more than God. And that's why these things are so critical to understand the intricacies of how they are enmeshed with each other. So as we start talking about creating spiritual practices for how we deal with money, how we look with money, I invite you to look back, to think back and see how and when your values and fears about money were initiated. What are the things that have happened to you in your life that have shaped your ideas about money? What ideas and practices did you inherit and learn from your family, your parents, other family members that affect your relationship with money? My grandfather turned 95 in July. He's part of that World War II Great Depression era. I never remember him and my grandmother taking a vacation. I never remember them going out to eat on a regular basis, unless it was like going to McDonald's and getting one hamburger and splitting it. I watched them and how they came out of that Great Depression worried that it could happen again, saving their money. And even to this day, it is the funniest thing. My grandpa does woodworking and hand skills, or hand carpentry. There is not a drill that he won't go buy, even if he already has one of it. But he will reuse a paper plate and a Ziploc baggie until they fall apart. Those are some of the things that I grew up around and have shaped how my relationship with money affects my life. What are some of those stories in your life? The answers to those questions are the reason that you view money the way that you do. And they are important in determining what kind of relationship you have with money. So what is it about money that makes us so uncomfortable, so fearful? Well, it's the overall concerns that people have when it comes to dealing with money and making financial decisions. Do I have enough to meet my basic needs? Will I have enough to retire someday? What happens if I have an emergency or a costly health diagnosis? Those are the uncertainties that make money so uncomfortable and scary for us to think and talk about. Now, many of us have a love-hate relationship with money. We love the freedom and the security that it provides, right? It's okay, we can say, yeah, I like having money to go and get what I need and get what I want. That's the love part. The hate part is what we have to do to get the money. We essentially make an agreement to exchange personal time and effort in exchange for money. We call that a job. So we spend a certain portion of our time doing a job, exchanging our services and our time to receive a paycheck. And unless we have the good fortune to be independently wealthy, unless we happen to win the Powerball, which if you do, just tithe on it, please. Unless we have a way of getting money without having to do this, this is part of the financial system that we operate in. Our survival depends on our ability to be secure, and money is the vehicle with which we do this. That's a natural human instinct to feel secure. It's instinctual, and it's also instinctual to guard what is ours, right? Dogs have this trait that some of them do called resource guarding. Give a dog a bone and then try and take it away. What happens? They don't like it, do they? Our dog that we had before Susie, Yogi, was just this lovable, huge oaf of a dog until you gave him a bone. You didn't go near him when he got that bone, because if he thought you were going to take it away from him, you might come back with a stump instead of a hand. Even though now dogs have become domesticated and they don't have to go hunt and kill for their meals, they still have that instinct. We can too. We have an instinct to survive, and so we guard our resources. And we can become so fiercely protective of what we have because of our fear of not having what we need. And our attempts to ensure that we will always be able to have what we need to survive, or what we think we will need, or what we want, we strive to get more and keep everything that we have. But our idea of what is really needed to survive can sometimes be skewed, because we actually sometimes don't have an idea of what enough really looks like. We talked about that last year. How much is enough? Unless we consistently and consciously think about the spiritual discipline of stewardship, our tendency is to fall back into old patterns and old habits that we've learned and practiced. The reality is that most of us here sitting in this room today have enough. Some more than enough. It's just that because of our relationship with money, we think we don't. That's why the practice of stewardship is so critical to our spiritual lives. The point of a spiritual discipline or a spiritual practice is to train the heart toward love, to give love, to receive love, and for using the power of love to bring good about in the world. That's what sets us apart as Christians. We have a way of being in the world that contributes not only to our own personal peace and equilibrium, but also to the community's peace and equilibrium through healing and health, by sharing love and compassion and mercy. As Christians, we aren't supposed to be only concerned about ourselves and having our own needs met. As followers of Christ, we care about those things for others as well. This idea is played out through the characters of George Bailey and Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. George faithfully manages the building and loan. He offers reasonably priced homes at reasonable interest rates to people who would not be able to buy a home on their own. He gives sacrificially both from his own pocket and for the community from his own resources. He cares about Bedford Falls, and he wants what's best for it and for those who are living there. Now, comparing George to Mr. Potter, the tyrannical bank president whose only goal in life is to destroy or take over Bailey Building and Loan, to eliminate the competition. When George goes back in time, when he's been made dead, and he goes back to see what his life would have been like, we see the corruption and the greed that flows out of Mr. Potter. His relationship with money is that he has to have all he can for himself. Bedford Falls is renamed Pottersville, and it's a dark and it's a corrupt place to live. Nobody is faring well in Pottersville except for Mr. Potter. Now, of those two characters, of George Bailey and Mr. Potter, who are we supposed to emulate? Who are we supposed to be like? Well, George, of course, right? We're supposed to be like George. How successful are you at that? Or is there a little more Mr. Potter in there than you'd like to admit? When we're not practicing the discipline of stewardship, we run the risk of allowing our relationship with money to disrupt our relationship with God. Money becomes more important than God when we're more concerned about how much we have, how much we think we should have, and how we use it, how we use what we have. Now, am I saying that we shouldn't be thinking about money at all? No, I'm not going there. I'm not going to even suggest that. We need to think about our finances. We need to have that emergency fund. We need to have savings for our future. We need to have a plan for retirement. What I am saying is that if your relationship with God and the ways that God asks you to support the work of the kingdom isn't a part of your thought process when it comes to your finances, there is a problem. If Jesus is Lord of your life, he's Lord over all of it. Every single part of it, including our financial lives. So this week I'm going to challenge you and encourage you to spend some time thinking about your relationship with money. What are some of your earliest memories related to money? What stands out to you? Watch your email this week for your midweek motivation. I'll be sharing with you some of the experiences that shaped my money relationship. I'll give you a snippet. I remember the first record album I ever bought. For those of you who don't know what record albums are, there's this vinyl disc that you put in a player and it had a needle and it spun around, and that's how you got your music. The first album I ever got, and I'm going to show my age here, was the soundtrack to the Muppet movie. I was eight. I bought it on credit. I'm serious, I bought it on credit. The album was about $9, something like that. I had to fold loads of clothes for 25 cents a load. Now, I got my record album right then. This is why I bought it on credit. I bought now and paid later for a long time. But when the laundry was done, inside the kitchen was a sheet that said 1 to 36. At a quarter a load, there's 36 loads in a $9 album. When I finished folding one, I got to scratch a number off. Now, I will confess, if it was an unusually large load, I scratched off 2. Sorry, Mom. My mom watches the sermon after it gets posted on Facebook later. Help me out here. If it was a big load, I deserve to cross off 2, right? You need to say yes louder so she can hear it. Thank you. Those are the kind of stories that shaped who I am, how I handle money. I'll share some more of those things with you this week in in the midweek motivation, as well as some questions for you to be thinking about. As we take this journey of a wonderful life together, I hope that we will discover that we do truly have wonderful lives. Amen.